Do you see this conflict, the beginning of the end of the state of Israel and the United States?
Well, Israel, yes. And I can see, I mean, just even with this first few volleys of missile strikes on Israel, we've never seen those pictures before. Israel, this is what Israel does to other countries, right? And this is the first time that I've seen leveled blocks, entire destroyed buildings. Maybe not leveled blocks. Well, actually, one of them, was a city's, I don't know where it was exactly, but outside of Tel Aviv, it looked like a leveled block. Many, many houses, structures had been destroyed and just were rubble. And then within Tel Aviv, you saw entirely destroyed buildings, and not just one, but several. This is something you never saw, and I think it's got to be a shock to the Israelis. Now their government, the IDF, I think is working hard to really cover up the extent of the damage, and they've made a lot of ridiculous kind of Baghdad Bob-like claims about how successful their air defense was, and but you can't hide the rubble. People in Tel Aviv know it. They know what happened. They saw the explosions. We saw the video of the impacts, and some of those impacts those explosions were enormous. So this is something. This is new. This has never happened in Israel before, and I think it's got to change the perception that Israelis and other people have about Israel and its security. They've always had this sense of invincibility, right? They're the ones that do this to other countries. They've never actually dealt with a country before that can hit them back, and that's going to affect the that's got to lower their faith in the future. The Israelis, many have left already. Some have come back, but after this, I think many more are probably going to consider emigration. And then again, it's just like if you're a business thinking about investing in Israel, you already had your doubts after October 7th, but this has got to increase your doubts that this maybe the long-term security, stability of this country is very doubtful. We're not even talking about the polarization of domestic politics, but now, you have you could say not exactly enemies within, but just a very fragile, a very fraught domestic political situation, and then you're dealing with actually a very formidable foe from without. That just puts, a lot of what a country depends on, especially an economy, is a faith in the future. And this is, I'm sure, just this first day of retaliatory strikes by Iran has affected that faith in the future, has greatly diminished it.
How do you assess Israel's ability to inflict damage on Iran versus Iran's ability to inflict damage on Israel? Because we see that the U.S. the system that Israel has adopted is via these aircraft, these fighter jets to fire missiles, whereas in Iran they fire these drones and ballistic missiles. Why are they? I'm wondering, why does Israel not have the same type of missile capabilities or force that Iran has? And the U.S. Trump had that tweet saying, we make the most lethal military equipment in the world, and Israel has a lot of it, and they know how to use it. So just saying by extension that the IDF, Israel's military, is the U.S. military. We're supposed to be the most lethal, the most powerful. Is this the best way that you should be conducting long range attacks? Is with this aircraft or the Iranian method?
Yeah. Well, the missiles have the advantage, and let's see, a ballistic missile in particular has the advantage of being able to carry a much larger explosive, explosive charge. Those air-launched missiles are smaller, and they just cannot do the same kind of damage. I think, that's a fact. And then aircraft themselves are more vulnerable to air defense than missiles themselves are. So, I would say that, that the advantage is really to missiles. We can see this in the Ukraine war. It's just that the Russians, they do use their aircraft, but they don't use them, they don't bomb fly over, or into Ukrainian airspace. So maybe just on the margins they do, but in general they don't, because they know that these aircraft, even against a very degraded air defense system, they're vulnerable. So they use them as kind of in a supporting role. They're obviously they're just one of many launch platforms. They use submarines, ships, these aircraft, but then many just ground-launched missiles. So it adds something, but Iran has all those things. I don't think they have the submarines, so they really have the navy, but they do have the land. The land-launched ones those are the largest missiles, and so it gives them. You can do damage with those air-launched missiles, and we've seen the damage they've done, but they don't do as much damage as the ground-launched missiles, of which Iran has plenty, and Israel has them. I guess it's the Jericho 3 or something. They have a couple, but they don't have them anywhere near the quantity that the Iranians have. So I think in just a pure air war, Iran has got the advantage here. Now, again, in the first stage, there were other things going on. They had these surprise drone attacks from within, but it looks like that, we can't be sure, but it appears that threat has now been neutralized. So they did, in that first, the initial wave of attacks, or waves of attacks that the Israelis carried off. They had that advantage of local drone attacks, but they just don't, that's, I think, gone. Now they have drones. Apparently they have drone bases in Kurdistan, which is northern Iraq. Again, it borders Iran, and also in Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan is a country kind of like Turkey that's always playing both sides. They are on relatively friendly terms with Iran, but also they have close ties with Israel. And so anyway, Israel apparently has a drone base there, so they can launch these drones from very close to Iran. And obviously drones can do a lot of damage. We see what they've done in Ukraine, for example, but they are also more vulnerable to air defense. So it really is a question of to what extent Iranian air defense has been degraded. But yeah, going just back to the larger question, I would say, we don't know. We've heard these claims about the Iranian arsenal, and I think it's true, and I think so far what we've seen supports it. But we're only entering into day 2, basically, of this war. So we don't know for sure. But if they have the arsenal that has been claimed for them, the Iranians will have the advantage. They have the larger missiles that can wreak really much more destruction.
Right. It does seem like the Iranian system is far inferior. The Israeli system is far inferior, of having to fly your jets over the space. Supposedly 2 or 3 have already been shot down. You talk about the maintenance costs, but they can't just fly over Iranian airspace. It kind of surprises me that Israel's in this situation, wanting war with Iran constantly, and it doesn't seem like they are equipped for it at all. And it doesn't feel like the United States is either. That we are using outdated tech that is not really. It's not going to play well in a war with Iran, and in the modern age where you have advanced air defense systems that can shoot down planes, where you do have live in a world with hypersonic missiles that can penetrate your air defenses. It just seems like everything is stacked up against Israel, and I just think even if the U.S. comes in into its defense, it's like, what are we going to do? Okay, we have all these bases throughout the Middle East, but you're just saying maybe we don't use any of them because the Gulf states don't want us to use them because they'll know they'll be open targets. They're very vulnerable to all of these even shorter range missiles that Iran has. It's like, what's the point of our bases? So what can we do? Maybe fly a few stealth bombers, but the F-35 is supposed to be a stealth jet, and if it's being shot down, that means the B-2 stealth bombers might be able to be shot down as well. And it's just like, how much of an embarrassment that's going to be the United States military. I don't know. I don't understand the thinking behind this, that we're going down this road and we don't even have the military equipment to back it up.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just again, it's hubris, and I think we probably underestimated the enemy. But this is a you look back, all kinds of military disasters began that way. Probably the most famous, of course, was Operation Barbarossa by the Germans in World War II. They seriously underestimated the strength of the Soviet Union. They undercounted their military forces. And again, in the first days, they, as you know, anybody who knows anything about the history of World War II knows, they achieved tremendous success. You know, it was like they advanced very rapidly into Soviet territory, and you know, the first encounters between the Germans, who kind of had the advantage of surprise, like the Israelis, you know, were ended up, you know, with total defeats on the Soviet side. They just ripped through the first divisions, the first armies that they met. And after, you know, just a month of these operations, the Germans concluded that they had basically won the war. And that was, and so anyway, this was this huge miscalculation. And then they began to see like armies appearing where they didn't really expect them. So like, you know, we didn't know they had an army there. And then they began to suffer some real losses. And even then, it took them a while to actually come to terms with the fact that they had really made a mistake. There was just this hubris, this certainty that, you know, basically the Soviets are finished. And so they had a chance, you know, I think they were destined to lose the war, but they could have done things, you know, like made adjustments. Again, a big surge, you know, the military historians, and I think it makes a very interesting argument about that. If they had recognized their mistake early on and made adjustments, they could have still, it's at least theoretically possible that they could have won the war. They could have gone to the Caucasus, you know, redirected their forces there, seized the oil fields, and that could have really changed everything. But there was this hubris. There was this gross underestimation of the strength of the enemy, and with catastrophic consequences. And I think, you know, this is something that I've always, you could see that recently Israel has been experiencing a string of victories, you know, notably in Lebanon and in Syria. Now, of course, you know, the Lebanese, on the ground, it really wasn't a victory, but they, you know, we all know about the decapitation strikes and then the fall of the Assad government. And, you know, these were surprises. They were entirely unexpected, and they were regarded as great victories for Israel. And so anyway, kind of similar to, let's say, the Germans in World War II after the Blitzkrieg in the West and these great victories, they had a sense of invincibility. And I think that, you know, the Israelis with their American backers, they have that same sense. You know, it's just like, you know, see how Assad fell. You see what we did to Hezbollah. You know, it's the turn of the Iranians. And in the first day, it started to look like the same thing, but it's sort of, now we're seeing, you know, that, wait a second, the Iranians have some depth. You know, you took out many of their commanders. You did destroy a number of their launchers. But in a very short period of time, they reorganized themselves. You know, they replaced all those people that were assassinated, and they fired back, and they did significant damage. You know, this is not going to be a cakewalk. But, you know, again, it's just hubris can blind people. You know, you just get the sense of overwhelming confidence, and you stop listening to the realists. You know, the realists are just the naysayers. They're just trying to deprive you of this marvelous victory that's within your grasp, right? You know, now it's time to seize the victory. And, you know, we'll see. I think that clearly the Israelis are going for it, and I think it's going to end very badly for them.
Do you think the U.S. and Israel are surprised by how quickly Iran was able to respond, and that maybe they're a little bit afraid and think that maybe we did bite off more than we could chew?
There's a possibility, you know, that there is, because I know Israeli military officials were claiming that, you know, Israel had done so much damage that there wouldn't be, you know, a quick response from Iran. It would take Iran days or maybe even weeks to hit back. And there were other analysts like actually Scott Ritter and Big Surge, who I just mentioned, who were saying the same thing. And big surge to his credit, quickly said, "Whoa, boy, did I get that wrong?" They they were ready. They didn't, clearly they have the forces and counterattack very effectively. But yeah, you did get those statements from a lot of people, including especially from the Israelis. So that it must be. I think they really did believe that maybe they had the Iranians on the ropes, that they had already kind of got ripped through the core of the Iranian military, and it rendered it, had fatally wounded it. And I think it's become clear to everybody that that's just not the case.
What has the global response been so far from leaders like Russia, China?
Yeah, well, Russia and China have unequivocally condemned the Israeli attack. They said that there's just, as just a clearly unwarranted, clear violation of international law, just unprovoked aggression. Now the Western European powers, I don't know what the different countries, but I know in particular what Macron said, are framing this, and I think the Germans too. Yeah, I know that Merz also. So Merz and Macron have both said that, well, Israel has a right to defend itself, which is just such an absurd statement. If this is defense, well, then white is black and black is white. It just says this is just a textbook case of aggression.
Okay. Yeah, I think one thing that's been interesting to see is just how many people around the world, though, are behind Iran in this, and how big of an impact do you think that's going to have on the outcome of this war?
Well, I don't know if it really is going to have much of an impact on during the war itself. I mean, the countries that can really make a difference, of course, are the countries that border Iran, how much they cooperate with them. Pakistan has announced that it has condemned the attacks and declared its support for Iran. And of course, Pakistan borders Iran, so that's important. It could be a conduit for weapons, for supplies into Iran. And then the Russians and the Chinese. And you say that you've heard that the Chinese have declared a willingness, to supply at least the components for the missiles. And I think that the Russians, again, let's not forget they very recently signed this comprehensive agreement with Iran. I think both China and Russia understand that that Iran, if Iran falls, it will weaken both of them. Iran is part of, you could say, this three-part, not exactly an alliance, but close to it. They're the three of them is the weaker party, but it is still a very important part to this Eurasian. We'll call it an alliance. And so I think they understand the importance of supporting Iran, and they will support Iran. Again with technology, with weapons, and with intelligence. I know that the Russians have already done that, and it will continue to do it, and I'm sure the Chinese will. So again, if this turns into a war of attrition, which it seems like it very likely will, that is another advantage that the Iranians will have. Again, it's just we've seen that there's just much more productive capacity there on the Russian and Chinese side, especially the Chinese. The Russians have their hands full, of course, with Ukraine, but they've actually been able to produce a lot more than even what's needed for the front there. And I'm sure they'll be able to spare some weapons for the Iranians.
Yeah, it just sounds like Israel is in a real pickle. It's finished. And then there's going to be a huge war here within the United States to manufacture consent for the war with Iran. And I think that's going to be a huge battle that's going to be playing out domestically here. I think it's going to get really weird in the next couple of weeks. And I don't know, I still think there's going to be some type of false flag. I hope we can stay out of it. I hope that there will be enough pressure, ground support pressure within the United States to say that, hey, we don't want this war. I'm not going to go die for Israel.
Mm-hmm.
I just imagine that the I wonder. I'm just thinking if I was a military personnel and I'm out there in some base in Iraq, thinking, what am I doing here? And this now Israel's starting this war, and they're saying that the U.S. is involved. I'm like, I didn't have anything to do with this. Don't you know? I just feel like there has to be a lot of resentment probably building up within the U.S. Armed Forces as well. I'm sure these they have YouTube. They probably people in the U.S. Navy. They probably learning about the USS Liberty secretly, and they're like, "What is? I don't want to do this. Don't send me into the Red Sea. I don't want to go here. Don't send me into the Persian Gulf." So I just think it's going to get hairy. But the game, like Lindsey Graham said, for him it's a game on. This is what they want. I don't think they're going to get it. They're not going to be able to manufacture the support. But then there's going to be all types of crazy stuff with Palantir, false flags, the end of the empire, Samson option. I just this thing is just starting to cook. It's going to boil over.
Right. Well, I mean, even before this war broke out, there was somebody, I think actually there was an Israeli pundit that described what was going on in the U.S. as kind of a civil war. He was using that term, let's say figuratively, and applying it just to politics, actually Republican Party politics. A civil war between really the Zionists and the MAGA core. And we had people like Tucker Carlson arguing that we got to keep out of this. And by the way, now Tucker Carlson has very strongly condemned this attack by Israel. But on the other side, we had people like Mark Levine, going to visiting Trump and just pressuring him again to become involved in the war. Well, that civil war, so-called, is going to continue. That's the thing, is that they're both part of what elected Trump, the extreme Zionists, but then also the America Firsters. And there's an obvious contradiction. Now, there's a lot of people kind of in the middle that just don't think things through very clearly, and they think they're both. But the ones, the ones that have seen through it and do have, a clear ideological orientation are clearly at loggerheads now. So again, we have, the Tucker Carlson people and Marjorie Taylor Greene and so on one side, and then we have, all the Zionists like Mark Levine on the other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All just storm clouds up ahead. Well, we'll see. Okay, well, is there anything else that you'd want to let us know before we sign off?
No.
Okay.
No.
Well,
yeah,
I'll get off here and look at the news and see if
right. I know.
what else has happened.
Right. It's just been it's been an extraordinary. I don't even know how long it's been. 36 hours or something. Yeah, 48 hours maybe since it started. No, I don't. I mean, It hasn't even been 48 hours. I don't think. No.
Right. It's ongoing. It's just started, and I think people it hasn't hit home for many people. Because when I talk to my friends, most of them are still, the NBA finals or whatever it is. It's not not that.
Right. Yeah. Well, again, that's true. It's just that a lot of people just don't pay attention to these kind of things. They're huge. They're going to have a huge impact on the world. But until they start to experience it directly at home, it doesn't really exist for them. But this has the potential. Again, if it goes, if there are economic targets and, again, oil refinery, Strait of Hormuz. But then if the U.S. becomes directly involved and U.S. military bases are hit, then we have body bags with soldiers in them coming back to the U.S. Then people are going to notice. And I think that's going to be bad for Trump.
Right. I think most people don't think about it now because the sad state of affairs is that we are just used to it.
Yeah.
I mean, my whole life, we've been involved in some type of conflict in the Middle East. I was a little kid when 9/11 happened, and it's this war on terror. Mm-hmm. So it's just this background noise for most people. It's like, oh yeah, there's something going on there, and we're involved. Yeah. And they think the same thing with Iran and don't realize that, oh no, this is much bigger.
Yeah, no, it is much bigger. They have been TV wars, the extent that people became involved. They just watched it on TV and it was kind of exciting, but it was, again, like video games. It's something that didn't really come home and affect them directly. But this is different. I really think it is. This is a country that can fight back. Iraq really couldn't fight back, obviously the Gazans can't fight back, but Iran can, and it's already demonstrated. I've never seen those kind of images coming out of Israel. And the Israelis are trying to downplay it, but it's got to have affected the psychology of the Israelis significantly.
Right. And, just the ability for the Israelis to try to garner sympathy now, it's so, the hypocrisy is just laid bare. And people are just like, are you kidding me now?
Yeah.
You're saying, look, they're targeting population centers. Like, first of all, you've been bombing Gaza relentlessly for almost 2 years. We saw you just bomb apartment buildings in Lebanon, kill hundreds of people at a time. And you're just doing the same thing in Tehran. Right. And then you see that, Israel's got the head of Mossad is located right in downtown Tel Aviv. They got their missile launchers embedded in the city. It's like they use this excuse of constantly, Hamas is using human shields, and it just none of their arguments. The fact that they're even saying it right now, I think is just hurting them. It just people are like, you got to be kidding me. After all this, there's all these jokes going around like, I just went over and punched my neighbor in the face. Pray for me because it's what is going on?
Yeah, I mean, it's just the hypocrisy is so brazen that you hear like that statement by Israel Katz, the defense minister. The Iranians have crossed all red lines. They're striking population centers, and you just say, "Aren't you?" You'd think that you would be embarrassed to say that, but I don't know. I guess they're just beyond embarrassment. They just
right, yeah, and so it's just that's why I'm also just nobody other than the people that are in the pocket of AIPAC or ideological zealots, Christian Zionists, or just hardcore Jewish Zionists. Those are the only ones that can be supporting Israel now. I just don't see the whole world is behind it. I saw, I don't know if you know who Charlie Kirk is. He's a popular guy. He had a poll out on Twitter, and most of his followers, there are a lot of evangelical Christians, and they said, who do we support, Iran or Israel? I think it was like 88% said Iran.
Wow.
This is Charlie Kirk speaking to his base.
Wow.
Or was it something along? I don't have to see exactly, but yeah, it was something like 88% that were for Iran against Israel, and so it's like it doesn't. Nobody wants this. People, they're not going to be fooled again.
Yeah. Well, let's hope so. Let's hope so, and then let's hope that does affect the thinking of Donald Trump, and that he pulls the plug on it.
I've lost all hope for him.
I know. It's a mistake to put any hope, but. So I shouldn't even say that, but it's just who knows? It's just like he might do. I'm not placing any hope or have any confidence that he will, but there is the off chance that he could. There is the chance that he really could respond to these pressures for his own interests, his own political survival.
Right. I mean, just how the fact that the Iran negotiations were a ruse. That he lied to everybody about wanting to achieve peace. Maybe there was some initial intention, but it became clear that something weird happened when Witkoff first said, "Okay, we can have some enrichment," and then it's like, "Okay, we both want to deal. We don't want a nuclear weapon. You don't want us to have a nuclear weapon. This should be an easy one to hash out." Right. Then all of a sudden, completely flipped the script, and I think it was at that point where it was like Donald Trump, or whatever, was Netanyahu said, "We got the Epstein files. You better go along," or something like this. Something happened, and then it became part of this ruse to, and it's so nefarious and craven that it's just I've lost any respect for the Trump administration to be honest, to do anything realistic, and the rest of the world I think sees that too. No way that Russia is going to be engaging in real negotiations with the United States over Ukraine anymore after this. Especially we saw what happened with Operation Spiderweb on the eve of negotiations in Istanbul. Right. I'm sure China is like, we're completely done. No, who's going to? I don't trust my own government with anything. I'm afraid of what's going to happen here. I'm at the point where maybe I do need to go back to China. Like with this Palantir stuff, just the fact that we're talking about the conflict honestly in an objective way. I'm afraid when this starts to spiral out of control and they need a manufacturer consent, they're going to come after everybody that's trying to speak against it. That's what happens. So this is I don't know. It's
we're not there out of control. But, but it is scary. I agree.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll end it there.
Okay.
Before I get too heated.
Okay.
All right. Okay. All right. Thanks a lot, Dad.
All right.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.